This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault. On today's show, we are continuing our A24 Retrospective series. This is our 30th edition of the series, and you can listen to recent episodes number 283, A24 Retrospective Mississippi Grind, 277, A24 Retrospective Dark Places, or go way back to episode 108, A History of A24 Films, to get the full backstory on the company. Today, we are looking at the 2015 film Mojave, directed by William Monahan. The film stars Garrett Hedlund as Tom, a depressed director who goes into the California desert on a bender and ends up coming across Oscar Isac's drifter, Jack, where they have a confrontation that continues back in LA. I want to welcome back to the show Matthew Simpson, one half of the Awesome Friday podcast and fellow Cascadia Critics member. How are you doing today, brother?
Okay. I'm fine. How are you, brother?
I'm doing all right. Oh man, yeah, this is gonna be a really interesting episode. I don't want to spoil too much yet about our thoughts for it, but I do appreciate you coming back for this one. This is a lesser known A24 movie, although I do remember when the trailer came out because I was vaguely aware of Oscar Isaac at this time. I think I had already seen Ex Machina and A Most Violent Year, and like, I found with those two performances is that they were so completely different. I was like, oh my God, I need to see what this guy does next. I saw this trailer. I was like, oh, okay, this movie seems interesting. It definitely seems different than his other stuff too. And I think it had already been announced that he was going to be in Star Wars, because that came out, I think, less than a year later or later this year that this came out. I can't remember exactly what the timeline was, but it was very shortly after. But do you have any recollection of when this movie actually came out?
No, I don't. I never heard of it until you suggested it, to be totally honest, which makes sense because I'm actually just looking at some details about it right now. And do you know how much money this movie made at the box office?
I imagine very little.
$8,600.
Ooh, yes, very, very little.
So it played in 26 cinemas, and then I guess went straight to VOD because but yeah, it made no money. I think that, probably speaking, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that it's there's a reason for that. I think they probably dumped it and tried to sweep it under the carpet.
Yeah.
Because it's not very good. There's no other way to put it.
Spoilers.
But yeah, I had never heard of it, which is weird because Garrett Hedlund is also quite famous, and Walton Goggins is in this, and I had never heard of it until you suggested it.
Yeah, it did get, I believe, if I'm about to go into this shortly, it was released on VOD first and then theater second, which is a very interesting release strategy, I guess one could call it. But yeah. So Mojave was written and directed by William Monahan. The writer made a name for himself penning Kingdom of Heaven and Body of Lies for Ridley Scott, and winning an Oscar for adapting The Departed for Martin Scorsese. He directed his first film in 2010 with London Boulevard, a movie he also wrote, and Mojave is a second and so far only other movie he has directed. I wonder why. But the film stars Garrett Hedlund as Tom, a famous director who goes on a bender while his latest film is stuck in post-production. He travels out to the desert to go to drink and meet a drifter named Jack, played by Oscar Isaac, who, after having a tense conversation where he claims he is the devil testing Tom, the two get into a fight and Tom steals Jack's rifle. The next day, while hiding in a cave, Tom sees someone approaching him and shoots him dead. It turns out to be a park ranger and not Jack, so Tom panics and leaves evidence to suggest that Jack was the killer and heads back into town. From there, it becomes a battle of wits as Jack finds out where Tom lives and begins stalking and harassing him and his business partners, hoping to get money out of Tom. The film also stars Mark Wahlberg as Norman, a producer, Walton Goggins as Jim, a lawyer for Tom, and Louise Bourguignon as Millie, an actress and mistress of Tom's. The movie is also known as Death Valley and had its premiere at Tribeca on April 18th, 2015. A few days after its premiere, it was sold to A24 and DirecTV. The movie debuted on DirecTV on December 3rd, 2015, and had a limited theatrical run starting on January 22nd the following year, as you had already mentioned. Now, this is going to be a spoiler-filled episode, so if you've not watched the film, we suggest doing so first, or maybe don't and just listen to this instead. The film is supposedly a thriller about fame and depression, with a wordy script seemingly inspired by the works of Aaron Sorkin, but features no thrills or scares, a baffling performance from Oscar Isaac, whose brother-to-line ratio is off the charts, and a murder framing plot that seemingly goes nowhere. Now that you know my feelings on the film, how did you manage to get through such a slog of this film?
Sheer force of will. Um, yeah, it's not good. I think that comparing it to Aaron Sorkin is also like, even if that's the stated thing, I didn't see that anywhere, but if it's the stated thing, that like, then it is not, it's very poorly executed. Like, it does not feel like Aaron Sorkin at all. It doesn't feel like anything at all is a problem. It's just kind of boring.
Yeah.
This is the kind of movie that I imagine if it gets any play at all from anyone, it's the one where like it's on while you're folding towels or doing housework or something, because like you don't need to watch this movie because nothing happens in it, and what little does happen in it is very, very boring and doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, I guess maybe a really good place to start is the fact that the central sort of motivation in this film is a revenge plot to set up Oscar Isaac's character. Well, yeah. So let's refresh this again.
Is it revenge though? Like, it's just like two men meet in the desert and they don't like each other, and then they try to kill each other, and then it's supposedly a game of cat and mouse from that point, but it's just so uninteresting that it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And what confuses me is, while watching this movie, we're under no real suspicion that the police think that Garrett Hedlund is the killer or that Oscar Isaac is the killer. So it almost feels like if neither of them did anything, they'd get away with killing the park ranger. At least what we see on screen, because there is no, because when Garrett Hedlund shoots the park ranger, he frames Oscar Isaac, and then that's kind of it. But how he wipes the gun down so there's no prints on it, how are they going to know it's his rifle? It's not like it says his name on it. And he pulls the one piece of wood that has the kill count on it, and it's like, all right, so what's the connection here to these guys? And we see the police investigating this murder a little bit, and they don't really get anywhere. The police don't actually talk to Garrett Hedlund until, really big spoiler alert, Oscar Isaac kills Mark Wahlberg. Like, there's no police interaction until then.
Yeah, there's no threat at all. And I guess, I mean, so the setup here is that like Garrett Hedlund is camping in the desert. Oscar Isaac wanders into camp. They become antagonistic. And then the next day, that night, Garrett Hedlund goes and finds a cave to sleep in for reasons. And he sees a figure approaching the mouth of the cave, and he shoots that person. And that person is not Oscar Isaac. Mm-hmm. And you're right. Like, there's no threat of this being a thing at any point. And I suppose the one connection is that it is he leaves a rifle behind to implicate Oscar Isaac, but he wipes it down first, which is dumb. And then Oscar Isaac does take the one piece of wood from the rifle. I guess they could match that because he's apparently a psychopath. Mm-hmm. But like, it doesn't. And the police show up at the scene, but then like they don't follow up on anything. Like, they don't know who anyone is at this point.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. They don't show up until at anyone's house until somebody else dies. And it doesn't, yeah.
And it's clearly very different police, because it looks like the park ranger murder is being investigated by the park rangers. And then we've got these two detectives from Los Angeles. So like, it's not even like the same police force, which obviously they could share information, things like that, blah, blah, blah. But we're not given that information as an audience member. So there's no way to assume that they think there is any kind of connection at this point.
No, not at all. And at least like, the police that do show up, one of them is Sterling K. Brown, and that's interesting. And he's not even credited on like most of the pages you can find about this movie. Like, he's not even mentioned.
No.
But he's in it for like 30 seconds, and it's thankless, but he's maybe the best part of the movie. It's such a weird, it's very convoluted but doesn't, in a way that doesn't make sense. And but it's also like I'm okay with convoluted. I'm actually kind of okay with doesn't make sense. But what I'm not okay with is boring. And this is just boring. Like, it doesn't have anything interesting about it. There's no threat. There's no mystery. There's no wild and crazy circumstance to make up for the fact that it's doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't have anything going for it. It's sort of too too straightforward, but also doesn't make sense, and that's not a winning combination.
Yeah, you're right. And like the whole time I was like, oh, this isn't that great of a movie, but I'm going to hold on and sort of hope that maybe that there's either a good twist or something that exciting that happens at the end. And then the movie kind of ends and I'm just left going like, huh, so like nothing really happened in this movie and this is all just a waste of my time.
Yeah. And yeah, like Mark Wahlberg shows up and he's Mark Wahlberg for like 4 scenes, and he's sort of exactly the version of Mark Wahlberg that at least I imagine he is in real life. Um, Probably not. That's probably unfair, but he plays a total douchebag. And
I think it's funny that you say that about Mark Wahlberg, because my note about Mark Wahlberg was, did he write his own lines for this script? Because one, it made no sense to the rest of the plot. He's basically just yelling movie terms out and mad that people are mad at him or something. It's a little confusing, but basically it feels like Mark Wahlberg is playing a version of himself. And this is clearly him doing a favor for William Monahan after getting an Oscar nomination in The Departed, and William Monahan being like, hey, would you mind being in my next movie? It's a really small part. You probably only need to be on set for a couple of days. Would you do it? And he was like, for you got me an Oscar nomination. Of course I'll do this for you. And he's like, but I'm going to do it my way. And then does this weird, insane performance that makes absolutely no sense.
I mean, that's conjecture, but it all makes sense. And yeah. I wouldn't even go so far as to say it's insane, because if it was insane, it would be interesting, and it is not.
It's true. Yeah. It's almost like a bad SNL sketch of someone parodying Mark Wahlberg, but it goes nowhere. So a really bad SNL sketch.
It's like Mark Wahlberg. To me, it feels like Mark Wahlberg doing the like a more exaggerated version of like Vinny Chase, who is based on Mark Wahlberg. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, it's super weird. I mean, I wouldn't say that I had a hard time getting through this movie. It's just so boring. But I was also like, at a certain point, I just sort of started doing other things at the same time, because it's like, it's totally the kind of movie you can look over at every couple of minutes and understand what's happening. And I think the single most interesting thing about it, and actually, sorry, before I go there, I will say one other thing. I like Walton Goggins in this movie a lot. He's the only other person. Him and Sterling K. Brown both seem to understand like the assignment in a way that nobody else does. And he plays a lawyer who shows up to be drunk and depressed, and basically to like give probably good legal advice. And his scenes are, I wouldn't say they're well written, but like he at least understands the movie that he's in, I think, better than everyone else.
I mean, I think he also only says like 10 words total. He basically, for most of his scenes, sits there silently with sunglasses on and then sort of chimes in with like his witty advice at the very end of every scene.
Yeah, don't forget the cocktail. He always says cocktail.
Yes, that too.
But yeah, I mean, that is sort of enough to leave an impression. And maybe that's because everyone else is so boring, but like he at least gets it. You know what I mean? And but I would say that the only really truly interesting thing about this movie for me, and I hate to say this because I don't necessarily like just like shitting on people, but this is a movie that taught me that even Oscar Isaac can deliver a bad performance, because he's not good in this movie, like even a little bit. And it was that was kind of fascinating, because I had never seen him be bad in a movie before, even when the movie I'm watching is not something I don't like, right? But he is really bad in this. It's just so like wooden and stagey and like first year acting. Like, you know, it's like if I was in the movie. I'm not a good actor, and I feel like that's the level of performance that he's giving in this movie. It's super weird.
Yeah, I think this is a great place to kind of go next. His performance is absolutely awful, and I agree with you. I have sort of felt for, especially, you know, coming off the heels of Ex Machina and what he was doing after that, he was the most exciting actor in Hollywood for me, where every performance he was taking was daring and original and unique. And he just felt like such a chameleon to me, where he was a completely different person every time. Like, some actors, they turn in great performances all the time, but you still are always cognizant of who they are as a performer. Whereas with Oscar Isaac, every time it was like, oh my God, who is this guy? Now that feeling has sort of faded a little bit, especially since I didn't care for most of the Star Wars films that he was in, and especially the way his role was handled, getting smaller and smaller as the movies went on, which was whatever. We're not going to argue about Star Wars here because you and I don't agree on them. But there have been a couple movies where the movies aren't good. I think of something like X-Men Apocalypse or Triple Frontier, where even still then, he was still interesting in those movies, even if the movies themselves weren't very good. But you're right. This is the first time where the movie is god-awful, and a lot of it is because of Oscar Isaac, where you're just like, he's making the most baffling character decisions. It's like he read the script and was like, oh, I'm going to give him a crazy Southern accent. He's going to have blackened teeth. I'm going to have super long hair. I'm going to say, I don't know if it was in the script or not, but he literally says brother, literally 3 times every line he says.
Yeah, anytime he's speaking to anyone, he calls him brother. It's really weird.
Yeah.
It's like he watched Lost and went, I really like that Desmond guy. I'm going to do that. But I'm going to multiply it by 10.
Yeah. And it just goes nuts with it.
And this is the same year, like this is literally the same year as Ex Machina and Star Wars The Force Awakens, in which he's good in both. And the year before was A Most Violent Year, and the year before that was Inside Llewyn Davis, and the year before that was he in the year before that? He was in a bunch of stuff the year before that because he was still doing a lot more roles back then. But 2011 was Drive. 2010 was Robin Hood. And like, not all these movies are good, but he's good in all of them, Same with X-Men Apocalypse the following year. That is a bad movie.
Yes.
But he is at least, and I don't think it's his best performance, don't get me wrong, but I think he's at least interesting and compelling. It's hard to recognize him through like the amount of makeup and effects they had layered on him to be Apocalypse. But he seems to understand he's in a comic book movie and dials it up in a way that I think is at least interesting, Yep. Whereas this is just totally uninteresting. And you mentioned his teeth. I was going to mention that too, because he's clearly wearing like some kind of tooth appliance to make his teeth look terrible. Mm-hmm. And it's like he can't, like they're in his way. Like he can't act around them. They like force his upper lip out. And so everything he says is very pronounced in a very unnatural way. And I kind of wonder if they'd just taken that out of his face, if maybe it would have been better.
Yeah, I don't know. Looking at his filmography, I've never seen Body of Lies, but as I mentioned at the top, that was a movie that William Monahan wrote. So I'm guessing that's where he got the relationship with William Monahan too, and agreed to be in his movie, because I don't know how anyone read this script and was like, yes, this is an excellent script, because this is far from it. Like, this movie begins and ends with a terrible script, and everything afterwards doesn't help make it any better.
Yeah, and it doesn't supply, like, Garrett Hedlund's character is having this, he's a Hollywood director, and he's having this existential crisis, but for no reason that's communicated to us that I can recall. And perhaps the most damning thing about it to me is that I watched this 2 days ago, from the time we're recording, and I had actually forgotten. I was looking at my notes, and I guess I didn't write it down, but I had forgotten that Mark Wahlberg was in this at all until you mentioned it again. And it's just like, there's nothing interesting about it. It's just so boring. It's maybe the most boring movie I've watched in forever. And I know I'm just sounding like a broken record, but like, it's such an egregious thing to me for a movie to be that boring.
Yeah, which is definitely a real shame. And I'll say something else. I also didn't realize he was a director until I was reading the Wikipedia page to sort of summarize the plot. I thought he was an actor, because the only real indication we get is we see an interview a couple times of him being like, oh, I've been famous since I was 18. So at first I'm like, oh, famous. That means you're probably an actor. And then there's an editing suite attached to his house and stuff like that. I was like, oh, okay, maybe he's a producer of his film. I don't really know. It really wasn't until I was reading the Wikipedia page that I realized that he was a director and not an actor in this movie.
Yeah, and I would go so far as to say that it's meant to be implied because he mentions he's been famous since he was 18. So to me, that implies that like he's an actor turned director. But even that's a
Maybe.
stretch because the movie
Yeah.
does not communicate it. You just don't hear about that many 18-year-old feature film directors who are famous enough to have the status that this character does in the movie.
Like, unless he's playing Xavier Dolan.
Yeah, that's true. But also, I don't think Xavier Dolan has the profile that Garrett Hedlund's character has in this movie.
No.
So, I think like there's so many opportunities for this to be better too. Like if they had just made Garrett Hedlund, like Garrett Hedlund's like backstory does not need to be defined. He can just be rich guy with ennui. Would be totally fine and better. Like adding more mystery would be more interesting to this. And allowing them to focus in on, ostensibly this is a film about. This is the other thing we need to get to at some point, but like the film's not really about anything, but it's so close to being about something that it's very frustrating. But if they'd like removed some of the detail and focused on the core stuff specifically, then they could have eliminated or at least better explored like ideas of rich people aren't necessarily happy and reasons for that and having Garrett Hedlund's character drift through life and also having Oscar Isaac's character be a drifter. Like there's interesting nuggets of ideas there that just aren't capitalized on. And I feel like it's because the movie feels the need to explain so much, at least in part, that the movie needs to explain so much. And it just has a real lack of focus. And I don't know. I got to say, one thing I wanted to say, I was planning on saying at the top of the show was I kind of admire your commitment to watching every A24 movie because it means that occasionally you are going to catch up on a stinker like this.
Yes.
And I would be so tempted just to skip it because it's so not good.
The hope is that I'm going to uncover some real hidden gems, and I have throughout the past. But yeah, this is not a hidden gem in the slightest. And you're right, and it makes a bit of it a slog.
Yeah. That's a good word for it. Slog. It's not. I don't generally turn off movies, but I kind of wanted to turn this movie off, which says a lot because like I will sit through almost anything, and in the name of like judging a thing in its completeness. But I did not want to do that this time.
Yes, I'm aware. Like if this was, Friday night and you and your wife were trying to pick a movie to watch and you start watching this half an hour in, I would not begrudge you if you're like, you know what, let's find something else to watch.
Yeah. If I had watched this with my wife, I watched it while she was out of the house. And I think if I had watched it with her, we probably would not have gotten through it. At least I know I probably still would have, but she would have been like, you need to go in the other room or like, I'll go in the other room. Cause it's not a thing. It's just not good.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And speaking of things that like don't really make sense or add anything to the plot is the affair that he's having with the French actress, where I guess her whole purpose is so that way Oscar Isaac can stalk her. But like he's married and his wife comes back at the very end. Why couldn't it just be his wife? Why does it have to be a affair? Like it doesn't like. He's not using it to blackmail him. You're like, I'm going to tell your wife that you're having an affair. Like none of that happens. The typical trope beats that you would expect. And so you're just left wondering, what's the point of this woman being a mistress? Why can't this just be the actual relationship that he's in? He can still stalk her and harass her.
Well, and also like you don't know that he has a wife and kid really.
Yes.
Until like the last 20 minutes, like the last half hour, maybe.
Yeah. It's not until Sterling K. Brown shows up.
You don't know that he's in any kind of like, morally ambiguous position with this woman until the third act, at any rate.
Yeah.
And I sort of get the intent there to be like, he's just drifting through life. He's just doing whatever gives him momentary bits of pleasure in his like ridiculous amount of ennui. But like that is also not communicated. And they could either have done that with just her being the actress that he's sleeping with, or they could have just done it with his wife. It maybe would have been more interesting with his wife that he's like just drifting through their marriage and their life as well. Like again, nuggets of ideas, like so close to being, but then not actually explored. It's a very frustrating movie in that way.
And then like the ultimate scene of him harassing his mistress, I think he goes to her house. I don't know where he is. He's at some house where she's sort of sitting in the backyard reading a script, and she's like, "Oh, fuck off, leave me alone." And then some security guards show up, and they're like, "You need to leave." And then he leaves, and then that's the end of her storyline.
Yeah, she just disappears. I think it's meant to be like a restaurant or a club or something, like some public access place.
But no one else is there.
But nobody else is there. And then when that scene is over, you just never see her again.
Yeah.
It feels like it feels like the script is a first draft. Like, like it's, it's, or like, it doesn't even feel like a first draft. It feels like an outline. It feels like a page of notes that have not been properly expanded. But yeah, again, I'm sounding like a broken record. I just don't have that much to say about the movie because it's not that interesting.
Yeah.
Because it is not that interesting, and like frustrating because everything that approaches interestingness just doesn't go there. It's very weird.
And then we get like a scene that I'm guessing is William Monahan trying to recreate the famous Heat scene where Al Pacino and Robert De Niro face off against each other, having a conversation in a restaurant. And we sort of get that sort of same setup where Oscar Isaac and Garrett Hedlund are sitting in a bar. And basically that's supposed to be the pivotal moment where they come face to face for the first time since he's been stalking him. And they're going to lay out their whole master plan to each other and talk about how they're all smarter than each other. And then Garrett Hedlund basically just like, "No, you're stupid and wrong. I'm winning." And then Oscar Isaac's like, "Damn, he's right."
Yeah.
And it's like, what?
Yeah, this movie's not interesting. And like, yeah, that's a prime scene for like another twist that just doesn't happen. It's so weird. I don't get I get why this movie was very quietly like dumped to wherever it was dumped to. And I talk a lot on my show about how like when I'm going to watch a movie for the show, I'll see a film that is out and it'll be like, when it's a new one. So like, for example, this week on my show, we're going to be covering The Wild Robot and it's out on demand now. So I had the choice between like renting it for 25 or buying it for 30. And I always sort of have to like gamble on whether I'm going to buy it or not, like whether I'm going to regret that decision. And thankfully, I can say that, in that case, I bought it and that was the right call. And I can also say in this case, it was like $5 to rent or like $7 to buy. And I rented it and that was 100% the right call.
And a waste of your $5.
It was a waste. Yeah. Like, it's so not worth it. I don't get it. I don't get how this, I know there's lots of bad movies out there. I don't get how this one made it out, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just because like I was the first to admit like I don't have any inside baseball in the movie business. And I'm sure that like somebody had money and somebody had the will and they wanted to tell this story, and then somebody in production, a producer, someone saw it and went, "This is not good. We have to figure out a way to like recoup something from it." And then they quietly dumped it to avoid embarrassing anyone involved. And but we still saw it. So
yeah. And so like a bit of A24 backstory, at least what I've been able to kind of put together on my end, is this still is in an era where they haven't quite found their footing. They've had a couple sleeper hits in terms of Ex Machina was like their biggest sleeper hit, and Room comes out around the same time that this does. And so this was the first year that they get Oscar nominations for both Ex Machina and Room. But it's still within their phase of they don't really know what they are as a company. And so they've just been sort of buying movies out of festivals that have vaguely big names attached to it in hoping that it leads them to bigger names and bigger projects. And so this sort of, we're getting kind of close to the end of A24 just buying things for the sake of buying them, which is why there's a lot of like real stinkers at the beginning third of their history so far, whereas they get a little bit more choosy afterwards. And there are definitely bad movies that they've released post, Room and stuff like that. But usually they're more of a swing and a miss as opposed to this, which is just a dud. And there's a couple other movies that came out around this time. I think of something like Cut Bank that was pretty god awful and boring, that I already reviewed. I have this as my third worst A24 movie that I've watched, and I've seen 83 A24 films. The only ones that I have that are worse are A Glimpse Inside the Mind of Charles Swan III, which was the very first A24 film, and Revenge of the Green Dragons, which ironically, The Departed connection was co-directed by one of the Infernal Affairs directors.
Huh. I've not seen. I've seen A Glimpse Inside the Mind of Charles Swan when it was new, so it was like 2013, right? 2012, 2013. Yeah. And yeah, it's not very good. But I've never seen the other one you mentioned. But I will say also that, like, I'm just looking at a list of their films right now. And like, you're right. It's not focused. They haven't really found their identity, but like, there are still good movies earlier in their oeuvre, as it will. Yeah. And it feels like, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it feels like they started out very much like just buying stuff. And now once they sort of found their footing, they started producing stuff. And that's when they really took off.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Most of the stuff in this list is at least unique and interesting. You know, whether or not it's something that is good or that you would like. Like, we watched the last one of these I did with you, I think, was The Rover, right?
Yes.
Which is not an amazing film, but it is at least interesting and well performed.
I like The Rover. It wasn't bad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying that, like, if nothing else, the baseline stuff is there. And it at least explores the ideas that it brings up. And this does not any of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. We're only a half an hour into this, and both of us have completely run out of things to say. This might be a record for the shortest A24 retrospective episode ever.
I mean, it's tough, right? So it's actually, I think, more difficult to talk about a film that is just boring.
Yes.
It's one of there's two kinds of film reviews I don't really enjoy doing. And I'm not trying to say I don't enjoy being on your show, because I do.
Thank you.
But the two hardest things to talk about for me are things that are either just boring, like this, or just kind of fine. You know,
Yes.
like, yeah. Which is a long way of saying stuff that is just kind of uninteresting. Like, this could be fine. It's not fine, but it could be fine. And I would probably have just about the same amount of stuff to say about it, because there's just not that much to say about it, because it would just be fine. I kind of wish that this was a worse movie, because then it would at least be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Oscar Isaac's performance is not good, don't be wrong. But if it was like an 11 instead of a 9, like if you dial it up a couple of notches, we would have a lot more to talk about. And if the film was if the script was like a little more out there, then we would have a lot more to talk about. And if the direction were a little more interesting and a little less, for lack of a better word, basic, then we would have a lot more to talk about. But it is not any of those things. It is just a straightforward, boring movie.
You know,
that's difficult to talk about.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've seen your rating of this film, and I know it's even lower than what I'm about to say. But basically, what you're saying is movies that sort of exist within the like 2-star spectrum out of 5 are the hardest to talk about, because they're not completely awful, but they're not actually good. They're just kind of there. And like I said, I know your star rating is actually lower, because I think you gave it a 0.5 star, 1 star out of 5.
I gave it 1. I don't do half stars because I'm a pedantic nerd. So yeah, 1 out of 5.
Yeah, and I gave it 1.5 out of 5, so we're basically on the same page.
Yeah, I think I've explained this on my show before, but I don't do half stars, because I decided that a 1.5 is just a high 1. So, and that the fewer the sort of like ranks to put stuff in does actually keep me a little more honest, I find. So, yeah, just 1 star, because it's so boring, and like, if anything about it was interesting, it might be a 2. Like, it would still not be a good movie, but it would at least be interesting, you know?
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned before, like, other ones that you've talked about being swings and misses. And like, I'll take a swing and a miss any day. I never regret seeing something that is a big swing that doesn't connect. But when it's just, you know, when they're going for a single and they don't even make that, then I'm not really into it.
Now, I probably have no real basis in reality here, but talking about this movie, I almost wonder if William Monahan's, goals for these characters was something along the lines of Heat, but reversing the characters, because it sort of feels like Oscar Isaac is playing an Al Pacino type performance, where Garrett Hedlund is being the much more reserved Robert De Niro. Now, obviously in Heat, De Niro is the bad guy and Pacino is the cop. And here it's sort of reversed, where Oscar Isaac is the bad guy and Garrett Hedlund is the, I guess, good guy. I don't really know. But it's sort of,
I mean, there's no good guy in this movie. Like, they're all terrible.
Yeah. And I mean, same with Heat, but that's because he's writing Shades of Grey for excellent characters. That's an all-time classic. And I feel bad even comparing them in the same breath. But it sort of feels like it's almost him being like, oh, I'm going to do my version of Heat, but I'm going to reverse the character tropes and what they bring to the table, even though it doesn't end up working. I sort of see that maybe that's what he was trying to go for. Do you think I'm going crazy here, or do you think that could have been something he was thinking about while writing?
I also don't have any inside knowledge about this at all, but that feels like a pretty big reach to me.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
Well, I mean, maybe not. I mean, definitely Heat is a very influential film, but I also don't think that like the two characters at odds is exactly a new dynamic in films, right?
No,
so
it's not.
Maybe it's Heat, maybe it's any other film where there's two people who are at odds. And I will say that, like, yeah, the scene where they finally sit down and talk definitely feels like, okay, we're going to do the Heat scene now, for sure.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm just saying it's a reach because I don't want to compare them.
Yeah.
Like it's it feels like a reach to me. If it feels like a reach, like, let's just assume for the moment that is the intent, then it feels like a reach because it's such an overreach for like, they fall so short of what they're trying to accomplish, if that's what they're trying to accomplish, that I can't believe that would be what they were trying to accomplish. Does that make sense? I feel like I said that weirdly, but
no,
I think you get what I'm trying
understand
to
what
say.
you're saying. Yeah.
Like, it's just not there. Like, and if you're going to copy Heat, just copy Heat, like, just make Heat, but a Western. There, done. That's a great movie. Even if it's like a neo-Western and it's set in modern times, like, because that's, arguably what Heat just is. But just make Heat again, change the names, give someone a slightly different motivation, and just make that again. But this is not that. This falls so short of being that it's not, I don't feel like that's a fair comparison. Even though, like, yeah, that one scene is very much like, okay, let's do the Heat scene. Let's do that, In many ways, it might even feel like it's debatable, at least, that, like, maybe he wrote that scene, which is, again, it's not a great scene, but maybe he wrote that scene. He's like, okay, I wrote a Heat scene. Let's build a movie around it.
Yeah.
Like, it's weird.
Like I said, it was a very flimsy idea. It only came to me while we were talking about it by specifically mentioning the sit down scene reminded me of Heat.
Yeah. It's, again, I guess my takeaway here is that if that was the intent, then it is such a failure as to not be worth even mentioning, because it makes it worse. Yeah. If that is the intent.
All right. I don't have anything else really to say about this film. Do you have anything to say, or do you want to move on to our double bill pairing?
No, I mean, no. I think it's weird how bad it is. That's all. I mean, I just keep coming back to the same thing, because William Monahan hasn't had the most illustrious career. And we've already covered, I think, in pretty great detail how bad Oscar Isaac is, and how I think the word for Garrett Hedlund's performance is kind of checked out, which is what he's being asked for. But he's delivering, I think, in the wrong way. Like, the character is meant to be checked out, but it feels like he's just checked out of the movie. But like, the films he's done around then, so like Kingdom of Heaven is good. The Departed is obviously great. Body of Lies is a solidly fine movie. Edge of Darkness is a solidly fine movie, although the miniseries, it's the British miniseries it's based on, is far superior, just for the record. I haven't seen London Boulevard, but The Gambler, totally fine Mark Wahlberg movie. And The Tender Bar is, I haven't seen it. It came out 2-3 years ago, is also like lots of people really like that movie. So it feels like he has at least this consistency in output, except for this movie, which is, not, and like, again, not that they are great, but they are all fine. Like, they're all decent movies. They're all not regrettable watches. And then this movie is also in his filmography. It feels really weird.
Yeah.
And I guess everyone needs to have a high and a low. So maybe this is his, this and The Departed are his outliers.
Maybe, yeah.
But I don't know. I'm kind of just rambling. It just feels weird to me how out of step it feels with the rest of the films that he's written that I've seen.
Yeah, that's fair. And I wonder, comparing it to the other film that he's directed that neither of us have seen, if that would reveal that, this is just a guy that should clearly not be directing his own movies, and probably works better when he hands a script over to a director and they're like, oh, I've got some ideas. And then he either implements them or someone else does a touch up. I don't know what the writing process in Hollywood is. Such a mystery to basically everyone, because we almost never hear about when someone does touch-ups unless it's a very famous example. And so you'll often have multiple writers working on scripts and changing things, but due to Writers Guild credit rules, only one person will probably get a credit. And so we don't know. Did The Departed start out as a meh script, and then Scorsese read it and was like, hey, I got some ideas, let's punch it up a little bit here and there, and then it became a great script? I don't know. But we do know with Mojave, he wrote it and he directed it, and it looks like there was no one there to be like, hey, this isn't that great of a script.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe it's as simple as that. Maybe there's no one around to say no.
Yeah.
That does often feel like a thing in any creative endeavor, that you do need people around who are willing to be like, no, you need to change that, or no, that's not good, or deliver feedback. I think the Star Wars prequels are since we mentioned Star Wars already, the Star Wars prequels are a great example of that. Like, they definitely, I respect those movies. I respect that those are the films that George Lucas wanted to make at the time that he made them, but it does very much feel like there was no one around being like, okay, just dial that back a bit, just like maybe focus this part up a little bit. Like, it feels like there was no one to say no. And this film maybe feels the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I have no interest in watching London Boulevard. I'm not going to unless I absolutely have to one day. So I guess I will never know if he is just an awful director. And it reminds me a bit of maybe someone like Aaron Sorkin, who I mentioned earlier. He really needs to stop directing as well, because his direction is extremely bland and uninspiring, even if his scripts are still good. I wish he would stick to just writing and not directing.
I generally agree. And I don't think I don't think Aaron Sorkin is bad exactly. I just think he's uninteresting.
Yes.
It's very basic.
Yeah.
And I will say that, like, even if that's true of William Monahan, which I think it is, at least Aaron Sorkin has gotten a couple of great performances out of a couple of people. And I can't say that's true about William Monahan at this point.
I mean, it also helps that Sorkin is also a far superior writer. And, like, I love The Departed. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. But, like, Sorkin at his best is, one of the greatest writers of all time, screenplay writers of all time.
Yeah, I think there's probably people who would disagree with you, because there's some people who very much don't like his style. But his style is very singular. And I really like the way the dialogue is constructed in his screenplays. And this does not have any of that.
Yeah,
his films have like a pace and like a cadence of speaking, and like I don't know what the right terminology to describe it this early in the morning, but the way people speak is very distinct. In the same way that they are in like David Mamet films, the way people speak is very distinctive, and I get why that rubs some people the wrong way. But when he connects with the right actors, and when he connects with a theme that he's passionate about, there's no denying that it's incredible. And this is not that so far. And I don't think William Monahan is that. Like, again, like the rest of his films, except for The Departed, are, well, actually, sorry. I mean, I think that the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven is great, but
I agree.
the theatrical cut is aggressively fine, which is a weird distinction. But yeah, all of his films that I've seen are either bad, like this one, or just fine. Like he doesn't seem to connect with anything in the way that is required to be a great writer or director.
Yeah. All right, let's move over to our double bill pairing. Would you like me to go first, or do you want to go first?
No, you can go first. We talked about this before we went on air, but like I don't know what to suggest watching with this because I don't want to suggest you watch this.
The double bill pairing can be a palate cleanser too. So the movie I'm going to pair with Mojave is a movie called The Gift, which is a film that has someone that is also writing and directing, and in the case of The Gift, starring in it as well, with Joel Edgerton pulling triple duty. And the movie is also about someone destructive coming into the life of someone else who believes they are the good guy when reality, who is right and who is wrong, is a line that is blurred. And this is also a thriller. The Gift is a movie I like but don't love. It has similar-ish themes to the cat and mouse stalking, harassing thing going on that Mojave does. That's kind of about where the similarities start and end, because otherwise these are not the same movies in any regard. But I was just kind of going similar-ish genre. So that is my double bill pairing. Have you seen The Gift?
I have actually. I actually like that movie. I don't know that I love it. I feel like it maybe, without spoiling it, I feel like there's times at which it doesn't go far enough. Might be the way to say it, but that's also kind of the point. There's some ambiguity in it that I admire, but if nothing else, I think Joel Edgerton is it's interesting to see Joel Edgerton playing a bit of a sad sack, because he normally doesn't do that. And it's also really interesting to see. So the other main role in that film are Rebecca Hall and Jason Bateman, and Jason Bateman plays the douchebag version of his normal persona, which I think is really interesting and really effective casting. I think he's really great in that movie. And yeah, I think it's a great call. If you're like, we're going to compare movies that are like written and directed, and in this case, again, starred, and then yeah, that is a great call.
Thank you.
And I think that's an underseen film as well. Like I think that not enough people have seen that movie. Like I don't know that it's like truly great, but it is a very solid film that I don't think anyone I've talked to has regretted watching.
Well, thank you. So do you have your double bill pairing yet?
I mean, honestly, I don't want to suggest anyone watch this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest that you watch something with it that is features one of the only actors in the film that I liked in a much better role. So I'm going to suggest that you watch The Hateful Eight, because it is also a Western, and Walton Goggins is also in it, and he's also maybe the best part of the movie, which is saying a lot in a film that has like a cast of a constellation of stars in it. These are not similar movies at all, other than that, one is a Western and the other one is a neo-Western. But I would like you to see something great after having to sit through this. So watch The Hateful Eight with Walton Goggins after watching this. And you'll be like, oh yeah, it's that guy. And it'll be better because Walton Goggins is so good in The Hateful Eight. Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of an out there double bill, but I'm just trying to like cleanse the viewer's palate of this terrible movie, basically.
Oh, yeah, and that's completely fine. I'm a bit lower on The Hateful Eight. It's on the low end of my spectrum of Tarantino rankings, but it's still a very good and very interesting film, to say the least.
I mean, I would say that, and I'm reading your tone right here, in that like lower on your Tarantino spectrum still means good. Yeah. But also very specifically, Walton Goggins is great in it. And that's really what I'm suggesting this for. He is very, very, very good as one of the Hateful Eight. And that's reason enough for me to suggest it.
Mm-hmm. And looking at Goggins' career at this time, it looks like this comes at the end of his run on Justified, which I think was kind of his, breakout performance, because he had been like, a very small character actor for, I feel like 20 years earlier. And then Justified was kind of his first, he obviously wasn't the lead in that was a Timothy Olyphant show, but, he was like the big breakout star other than Oliphant for that. And then has since sort of flirted with being a bit of, not a leading man. I don't think he has that traits to him as an actor, but definitely more of a name property. And so this kind of comes right at the end. And I wonder if he was, what the deal is with this, if he was still just in the era of like, oh, I got to accept any work that comes my way, or, William Monahan's a respectable name, I should be attached to this. I don't really know what the reasoning is why he's in this movie, but it definitely didn't help him become more famous.
No. And I mean, like, the Justified ended in 2015, the year this movie came out. I will also point out he was in The Shield from like 2002 to 2008 or whatever that show ran in. But I do think this is an era where he is still sort of figuring out his place maybe a little bit. But in the same year of this movie, he did do The Hateful Eight. He also did American Ultra, which is a debatably good movie, but he's pretty good in it. And he's also has this long history of being like the guy that shows up in a supporting role and kind of steals the movie. Like, I know not everyone likes Predators, but he's freaking great in Predators as the convict guy, like the most terrible of the people dropped onto the Predator planet. And like Cowboys and Aliens, not a great movie, but he's very fun in it. And I think he sort of like knows his place as a supporting guy. And it's, he's only more recently taken on these lead roles, culminating in, Fallout this year, which has been nominated for a number of awards for. But he's just such an interesting performer. And I like the guy. I'm a big fan of, that guy who shows up in a film and steals the movie out from under the leads. And he's often that.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely is. Okay, well, this was our discussion on Mojave. Definitely neither of us recommend you watching it. Save both your money and your time, because you will get neither back after watching this movie. Matthew, thank you for sitting through this slog. And you are going to actually be back on the very next episode, talking about stuff that we are much more excited about. I'm not going to spoil too much about it, but it is going to be our Halloween episode, our yearly Halloween special, which I'm very excited for us to discuss, because I think we're going to have a lot more fun compared to this, where by the 20-minute mark, we were scratching our heads wondering what else to talk about for this movie.
Yeah. I'm actually pretty excited to talk about, to be on your next episode as well, because it's exploring something that exploring a type of film that I've had minimal exposure to and have been watching a lot of in preparation. So I'm very excited to talk about it because I've connected with it pretty meaningfully. So I'm very excited.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Where can people find you? And I know you're talking about The Wild Robot was your latest episode, but yeah, please talk more about Awesome Friday.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways to find me. Mainly, the biggest way, the easiest way, is that I am the host of the Awesome Friday podcast, in which me and my co-host Simon, we review 2 movies every week, or every week we produce an episode. Our most recent episode, which I'll actually, true story, be recording directly after we hang up here. We'll be covering The Wild Robot and Speak No Evil. And you can find the show anywhere you can find podcasts. Just search for Awesome Friday Podcast. It'll come up. Or go to the homepage at awesomefriday.ca, which also features like links to the movies and all kinds of good stuff. The other main way to find me is to go to my personal portfolio website, which is stretched.ca. I'm also a fairly prolific's the wrong word, but I write a lot for a number of publications, and you can find links to all of those on that site.
Love it. Yes, I will make sure to link to all of that in the show notes, as I always do. This has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at ContraZoomPod. What were your thoughts on Mojave if you have had the unfortunate pleasure of watching this? Leave us a comment on Spotify or send us an email. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.